education for the university. So my new goal is to move our university to become a bilingual, binational university, and kind of taking the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years in dual language education. So just wanted to share that with you because I'm very excited about that possibility. So today what I'm going to present is just a snapshot of some new work that I've been doing with some colleagues. In fact, you see that gentleman over there with the hat? He's one of the co-authors of this work, so I wanted to make sure. I didn't know he was going to be here, so I'm so glad he is. But basically what I want to share with you is about the National Center for Urban School Transformation. It's the NCUS Center. There's a website, so if you want to look it up after I present, I invite you to do so. So since 2005, NCUS has identified schools in the metropolitan areas where there's high evidence of high rates of performance and looking at socioeconomic issues and culture and background and special education, so that these are evidence that there's high performing rates even with all of these areas. Because so many times it's like, oh, we have a lot of special ed students, we have a lot of English learners. And in this case, it's identifying schools throughout the nation. Okay, this is throughout the nation, and they've been doing it since 2005. So and there's peer-reviewed journals that have been published from this work. So in 2009, 2011, those were some peer-reviewed journals, and then some books that have been written about this work. But what I'm going to be sharing with you today is just something that we're super excited about, and that is a new chapter, a new book, actually not a chapter, it's a book with lots of chapters, that's going to be looking at urban schools in the United States, access, equity, and excellence, and that's forthcoming. And again, Dr. Maldonado, who I just presented earlier, is the author here in this book that is forthcoming. So today I'm just going to give you a little snippet of what this book is going to involve, but it's basically moving towards a more powerful framework, a framework of excellence, and looking at urban schools. Because as we all know, when you start looking at schools that are in the higher economic areas, we don't worry as much. I mean, there are problems there. But we want to make sure that the schools where we typically find a lot of the most schools that are most oppressed, that we make sure that we really identify when we find that there is a positive, transformative culture. We as researchers, we read a lot about this. We have so many theories about what it should be, and what's really exciting about this work is, what does it look like? What does it look like in a classroom? What does it look like in a school, in a community? And this is the exciting part of this work. So, they look at access and, looking at challenging curriculum for all students and effective instruction and results. So this has been the work that NCUS has been doing since 2005, and now the new version that I'm sharing with you. So what we did is in 2017-18, NCUS collaborated with dual language educators in San Diego, and we started to look at what if we would look at dual language schools throughout the nation that have excellence. And I'm going to share the criteria with you, because that's what people, when we do professional developments and I'm doing workshops or just talking with individuals that are opening up dual language schools, they always say, can you show me one? Can I find a school? And again, that's high performing in a low socioeconomic area with large numbers of English, the population that we're talking about. Because that's what really matters. When you're able to really make impact, positive impact, we want to know about it and we want to see it. So this project allowed us to do this. So then we put out a call that says the NCUS America's Best Urban Schools, and this is it was presented at a symposium in San Diego. This year, unfortunately, they didn't put out the call, but it will be out again the following year, and I'm hoping that many of you here will be able to spread the news so that we can have more schools throughout the nation apply. So again, what we started to do is we looked at many aspects of what we were going to be evaluating and use the NCUS criteria that I'll share with you later. But the new the new component that we brought was looking at how do we begin to measure these schools using the guiding principles, and most particularly the 3 pillars of the guiding principles. I'm sure many of you have attended workshops throughout the week here that have been talking about what these principles are, so I'm not going to go over them, but one of the things that I think is really important is that we also were looking specifically at equity. What are these, how does equity play out in these schools? That was the most important aspect to us. So I'm not going to read you all these qualifications. I'm just going to tell you really quickly that the qualification criteria had to do with, it had to be in an urban location. It had to be non-selective admissions. You know how that works out, that a lot of times the students that really should be in there do not get access to dual language education. Low income eligibility, so looking at at least 60% of free and reduced lunches. So you get the picture of what the context is. Okay, so then we were looking at pillar 1, the high academic achievement. I'm not going to be going over test scores. You're going to have to wait for our book for that, but basically high academic achievement means that there is academic achievement with students that are able to achieve and that at all levels, and that are able to get those core areas, and that it includes special education as well. A lot of times students are left out because of that situation. Let me see, where am I? In pillar 2, high academic achievement, and then, I already said that, excuse me. So now going to pillar 3, the sociocultural competence. That's an aspect, I don't know if you have seen the new revision of the dual language principles, but that's an area that is new and that we're looking at it very specifically. As a matter of fact, I have a doctoral student right now that is focusing on sociocultural competence in dual language programs. But we also put another twist to what we were looking at as far as, this is really not, and I wanted to change it from a 4th pillar because it really is not a 4th pillar, but an additional area. And that is looking at how ideology, pedagogy, access, and equity play out in these dual language programs. And this is from some work that and we have a lot of authors that have talked about this. So then we move into, okay, I was going to go over more, these are more, I want to go into data sources. The other ones were more criteria, but you can go to that website and you'll see there are like 20 different aspects of criteria, but I don't want to bore you with a laundry list. But what's really important is that the data sources that we were looking at in this study were the applications. The applications, it's pretty rigorous because you had to have full school implementation. So that in itself eliminated a lot of people, right? Because a lot of schools have like strands. And we're happy that you have strands, that anybody that has a strand, nothing against strands, but we wanted to see what does it look like to have a full dual language implementation. And also that you would have, besides dual language, at least 5 years of implementation. In other words, not just a one-hit wonder like, oh, we had a good year, but at least that you would show some consistency in what had been happening at the school. So these were all just different evidence pieces that we were collecting, and I'm not going to go over them. I just want you to know that they were there. So in looking at this, once again, looking at it, as we interviewed teachers, we interviewed principals, we interviewed families, students. It was a pretty rigorous process. One of the things that we were looking at is how does ideology inform the pedagogy and then create that access? This just kept coming up, and this is actually from some of my previous research, but in fact, Dr. Maldonado was able to see the connection, that intersection, and I said, oh yeah, that works, because it started to come out in some of the interviews. So when we talk about ideological clarity, what are we talking about? And in teacher preparation, and in fact, we have some of our teachers here from our program, yay, wave. One of the things that we do in teacher preparation and also professional development is really allow teachers to go through the process of clarifying for themselves, what does it mean to be a dual language teacher? It's not just about Spanish and English, it's going beyond that. So it's looking at it as a beacon, and that's why we have a little picture of a beacon there. And it either announces or denounces teaching for equity and social justice, okay? So what does that mean? So teachers must go, and we saw this in the schools where you saw high academic achievement. You know, I've been asked by principals before, because I've been on this ideological trip for a long, long time. Ever since I was a kindergarten, when I went back to see why my kindergarten teacher put donkey ears on me because I spoke Spanish, it was about ideology. It's what she really, really believed. She had been taught to believe that the sooner that you left your Spanish and the sooner that you were colonized and assimilated, that the more chances for success. That's not true, and that's an ideology. So I really believe in this, and we see it over and over. I'm not the only one, because my colleagues, you know, also look at this. But it's an opportunity to deconstruct. Why do I say deconstruct? And we saw this in a lot of the teachers that we were talking with, is that they have gone through the process of identifying their own bilingualism, their own journey in becoming a bilingual individual, and then now a teacher. And many of them have come from restrictive language policies where language was stripped from them and so on and so forth. So they're trying to create this change so that more students will not have to go through that dehumanizing type of education. So there's a lot to be, so you become more of an advocate. You see the agency and the urgency to be these amazing teachers. And some of the questions when we're looking at developing ideological clarity, I'm not going to read all these questions, but the main question, and this is for administrators, this is for superintendents, this is for university presidents, but you have to look at what are the beliefs, the values, and looking at all the theories that inform your thinking, right? And a lot of times we don't go through the process. A lot of our young teacher candidates, you know, are going through this process, and many times, you know, they go and they work with teachers, and they're wondering, what is it that informs those teachers, the teachers that they're working under? What informs their ideology? What informs their pedagogy? So these are really critical things that we were able to engage with these teachers at these schools of high-performing schools in low socioeconomic areas. Because if you don't have this piece, a lot of times you just kind of, it just becomes very technical. It becomes technical work, and it loses the intellect that has to be behind it. So then you look at the clarity for your pedagogical perspective and clarity. So it's really focusing on critical consciousness. There's a lot of research right now about critically conscious teachers, Ángela Valenzuela, Cervantes, and more, that are moving towards really what does it mean to be a critically conscious teacher. And when you're working in these communities, again, if you are in an upper middle class community, a lot of times, you know, you don't really think about these things, but when you're working with low socioeconomic areas and in communities that have not been respected and have been devalued, this is really important, because then your pedagogy really begins to take shape in a way that really impacts your students in a very favorable manner. So do teachers' values and core beliefs manifest themselves in the classroom? When we were looking at these teachers at these schools, we came in with a very critical lens. It's like, okay, are they actually doing what they say they do? So many times you can talk about it, but when you go into the classroom, you go back into the regular status quo curriculum. So it's really looking at these teachers that we were able to see in these schools that they were beyond the technical skills, and they were able to really check their ideology that informed their pedagogy. So when we talk about this, it's like, what are the things that inform my practice? And right now, what is the big thing that there's a big debate about? Translanguaging, right? So you look at some people are like totally against it, some of them are for it, some of them are not. Way to go. This is another time for us, when we start looking at different things that are evolving in dual language education, to really look at what are the core values. What are the core values? What do we believe? And a lot of times we become such purists, right, that we say like, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. But then you start looking at, well, what is the context of the community that we're working with? And this is what happened in the schools. As a matter of fact, I just had a flashback right now. So will of you remember Dr. Maldonado, that in one of the schools that we were observing, there was a lockdown on that day. There was something had happened in the neighborhood, and to this day I'm not real clear what had happened. There were police cars, and everyone had to just kind of duck. And so this is for real when we're talking about these communities. And so teachers have a very clear idea of how they work with their students and how they react to things, and always just really moving towards what is best for the students. So then we're looking at access. How language and power fit into the dual language classroom, dual language education classroom. This is a big issue, and this is why one of the criteria aspects was that there was eligibility for everyone, that it's not just certain people that pass certain tests. And even I was observing in a school that was this is not part of the study, but it was a different situation. I was in an upper white middle school, and there was a principal there, and she was having a back to school night, and she was talking about the lottery system. And so in the corner I saw a group of 10 individuals, and they were from an indigenous community, but they were in this very prominent school because they were, of course, the housekeepers, dishwashers, and so on. And they were trying to figure out how they could get their kid into this dual language program. And so the principal said, well, you just have to throw your name in the hat, and if you get it, then you do. So these are the people and the students that by just a language right, a human right, should have access to this education, and they did not have it. And they were wondering what they were going to do because they didn't understand. So this is, and we have some communities right now that are opening up, and when I talk to these principals, I say, I'm very happy that you're opening up a dual language program in a high economic area, but give access to the children that don't speak English first, So anyway, we're still working with that, and that's what I mean by access, and again, but they have certain beliefs that tell them. So again, just some tough questions, who requires additional scaffolding, am I strategically creating universal access for all students? Am I making excuses? And in the schools that we found to be the winners in this, what was it, a competition really, of America's Best Dual Language Schools, we saw that this was very, very clear. So what's affecting everything that's going on with a dual language? So we have, of course, a changing national context. We have the standards reform, we have Common Core tests, and a lot of new accountability systems. So it's evolved so much. This morning we were talking about the Bilingual Education Act, 50 years ago, what was happening, we're going through the whole history. And it continues to evolve because now we have the Common Core standards, and we have all these different accountability systems that we have to be considering as we are opening up dual language programs. But one of the things that I think has been a theme that is always coming up is, what is the equity, right? It's about equity in everything that we do. And if we are not focusing on equity, then we're gonna continue to have the privilege, have more privilege and become bilingual, and again, the students that have not been receiving the education they deserve and the right that they have will not have it. So in this changing linguistic landscape, we're looking at Gandara and Maxwell. This is back in 2008. They were saying English learners are more likely than any other group to be taught by teachers who lack the appropriate preparation. And that is true today. We just haven't gotten up to speed with teachers really understanding how to work. And this is just in the English-only component, so you move to the bilingual component and looking at teachers are the key, and again, I'm biased because I am a teacher educator, but teachers are the ones that are going to make or break a program, because no matter what structures you have set up, if you don't have teachers that have this clarity, that really understand the pedagogies and are intellectuals, this is one of the things Henry Giroux always would talk about, teachers as intellectuals, and moving from being technicians to being intellectuals. And when you see these thriving dual language schools, these teachers know about the research, or they're thirsty for more research, and that's really, really important. I just wanted to point out, California, because I'm from California, and we are just the most diverse in the nation, the state, and we look at the numbers of how many students we have that speak a language other than English. Look at that. It's over 2.6 million that we have. So dual language education in California, as you know, we've gone through some ebbs and flows with different policies. And now our new one is Proposition 58, that it's okay to, it's wonderful to be bilingual. It's a global perspective. It's a 21st century, idea. So it's going really well. So what we have to be very careful about is that we don't go backwards. And once again, that's why for us being able to identify these characteristics of these, effective dual language schools that have equity at the core is really important. And the work has just begun. I mean, this is just something that we did last year. We're taking a hiatus this year, but we're hoping to just really kind of ramp it up for next year. So looking at who are the dual language students and what are some of the complexities that we have in schools right now when we're working with these students. And we have students that come from so many different cultural and linguistic backgrounds and experiences, right? Right now, one of the programs that we're working with at San Diego State and also with UCSD and with the Department of Education and also with our Mexican colleagues is that we have students that we share. In the United States, we have over 700,000 students that we share with Mexico. And I know that there's numbers are there for other countries as well. I just am focusing right now on that. So that's a new population. That's a new population of students that we must prepare our teachers to be able to work with. And so right now our project that we're working on is preparing teachers on both sides of the border, but my presentation is not on that today, but I just want you to know because every time we look, we see, wow, there's a different linguistic background, a different typology, of a student. Many students come with different degrees of formal schooling, right? So you walk into these schools and you see all these different students that are walking around in school and you're saying, this one had a primary education when they were in Mexico or in Venezuela, whatever, and they're coming here. Socioeconomic status is also very different. And then mixed documented, undocumented status, unaccompanied minors, and then the students that we share. This is what we find in the schools, and when you go to these schools that are effective, they embrace these students, okay? They embrace these students and they are there to work with them and to meet their needs. So this is very different from saying like, well, these kids are undocumented and they're probably not gonna be here for a very long time, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time with them. You don't see that attitude from these teachers. It's, they're here and it's our responsibility to impact them in the most positive way while they're here. So this is just going back to the typologies of bilingual learners. Going to some are bilingual, some speak English, some don't speak English, some of them have primary language literacy, different dialects, prior schooling, socioeconomic status. These are all areas of importance that teachers need to know about. So when you're talking with these teachers that are effective, they know the background of all the students. They can tell you what's going on with each child. They really get to know the children that they're working with. So one of the things that we're looking at with this book that we are writing very soon is what are the indispensable qualities of high-performing urban dual language schools? And we're looking at equity at the core. Okay, so we're using these schools that we have observed as the example and as a model because, as I said, the scores are there. We already know that there's high academic achievement, but looking at what are those salient characteristics that we need to really be cognizant about so that we can help others to find this. So you know what, I'm not going to bore you with all of this analysis because we're still working on that. But here, what I want to show you is just what I've developed as a framework looking at my 30 years of experience and observing these schools is that what is critical, again, is equity and access. When we're looking at dual language education, especially because right now we have this whole issue of gentrification of dual language programs, equity becomes something that we all need to really be having at the forefront, and access for these students. Because Guadalupe Valdez, 1997, warned us. She gave us that cautionary note about making sure that that bilingual education was going to be to serve the students that it was intended for. And again, I can't help but go back to our presentation this morning where we were talking about the Bilingual Education Act and going through the whole history of what's happened in bilingual education, the ebbs and flows, that it's okay to teach bilingual, now it's not okay anymore. And so we just go back and forth, but I think that if we really put equity and access at the core, then everything else falls into place. So how does this framework work? You look at, I already discussed, the ideological clarity and the critical consciousness. So when you walk into these effective dual language schools or schools that are really making a positive impact, you see this. You're able to, when you speak with the principal, you speak with the teachers, and when you speak with the parents, they are there ready to just tell you how this all works. And then also that the parents themselves and the students start to develop this clarity, in their own thinking. And of course, it carries out to the pedagogy. Linguistic and cultural efficaciousness. Okay, one of the things that we find a lot when you walk in and out of schools observing, teachers, as you all know, we come with our own typologies. When you're prepared teachers, did you learn English? Did you learn Spanish or whatever the languages, the target languages? I know personally, I'm a heritage speaker. I didn't really start to, professionalize my academic Spanish until I was in college, because other than that, I was educated in English, and then of course I just learned Spanish because of my environment, which was on the border. But we have teachers, I know that when we walk into one classroom, you say like, oh, she's got a Chilean accent, she has a Spanish accent, oh, ese tiene un español casero, that's a, and you look at all the different, and so teachers are aware of this and are willing to work on whatever it is that they need to work on to be the best models for their students. And in teacher preparation, that's something that we're looking at also. As a matter of fact, Dr. Maldonado teaches a course that helps teachers to really elevate their Spanish to a level that they feel more confident in being able to teach it. So you see that also in schools, and it's an awareness and it's a willingness to be able to work on it. So when we do professional development, this is one of the things that we did find in schools, that we found that many schools don't have the Spanish professional development or the Mandarin or whatever the target language is. We always do dual language professional development in English, So looking at this, so where is the efficaciousness in that? And so moving towards in preparing teachers that if they're going to be teaching in specific content areas in a certain language, then they should learn that language, right? The content area language. So that's what I mean by that component. And collaborative dispositions. These teachers, they work in collaboration. They know and they stated over and over that this work cannot be done in silos. That they had to always share information, materials, planning, and so on and so forth. And then looking at themselves as teacher scholars. In order to be advocates, you have to be up with the literature, with the theories, with the practices, and of course having knowledge in the content areas and the standards and assessments in both English and Spanish. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. Okay, I'm going to skip that because I already talked about that. But this is an important one. So when we start looking at pedagogical clarity, what really makes a dual language program is what's happening in the classrooms, right? And is there consistency in the work that's happening there? So when you start looking at, really contextualized pedagogy, we see that teachers' dispositions really lead to effective instruction. These teachers that are there, one of the things that we all know in dual language programs, you work double, right? It's double the work. There's no way around it, so just for your information, you know that, right? Many of our students, when they graduate, they work really, really hard on the program, and they say like, okay, I can't wait to be a teacher. Well, the work is even doubled. But it doesn't even feel like work because we love it so much, and that's what we heard a lot from these teachers, because they said, in order to get this done, this is what we have to do. Strong commitments in caring for their students, and so it's a real shift from deficit to an asset-based perspective. And this is something that we saw throughout a lot of the visits that we did with these teachers that were making a positive impact. So in having deep knowledge and understanding of the shifts of the Common Core, they were able to really work in a very collaborative nature to be able to meet these standards, okay? And then authentic engagement and understanding of language complexities and dialogical classrooms. These were not silent classrooms. These are classrooms where there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of dialogue going on with students, and that they're given permission to talk and to use the language of ideas, whether it's English or Spanish. And then, of course, innovative language instruction. So these teachers are not your typical teachers that stand in front of a classroom like I am right now. And they basically are having students engage in a lot of cooperative learning, and they are also working with students that the way that they're paired up, they're not in they're in heterogeneous groups, so that makes a big difference also. Okay, so what I want to point to is Yoso's work is that we really need to look at these worn-out deficit linguists' views. I know, in fact, this morning we were talking about sometimes we get stuck on models where you say, well, it's got to be a 50-50, it's got to be a 90-10, or some people are 80-20, right? Are you involved? You guys are laughing. Those are the conversations. So we can't, get stuck on this is the way it's always been, and we got to continue this way. So this is what I call, these worn out, views, and looking at what is a contextual reality of your community, and then decide how you go there. But the most important thing is looking at how do you capitalize on the capital that your students bring to the classroom. And this becomes very, very important when you're working with low socioeconomic schools, because it's very easy to say, oh, these kids this, these kids that, but just instead of looking, flipping it and saying the aspirational capital that these students come with, the linguistic capital that they have, the familial capital that they have, as far as, working with parents and families, that it's there, the social capital, the resistance capital, and also the spiritual capital. So this is all Yoso's work, and you have the reference right there. It's, if you haven't read her work, I think it's something that's really important for teachers to look at and see how they can manifest in their classroom. The curriculum, looking at and again, these were Spanish-English dual language schools. So just looking at powerful curriculum, looking at literature that really brings out who they are and that they can relate to. And there's more, but this is just an example of some of the books that I saw on shelves, while we were visiting these schools. I'm going to skip that. But I want to look at how these dual language programs have shifted from being, on the sideline to now being at the center. And this is one of the reasons that what we wanted to do was look at schools that are full implementation, okay? And so and what we saw in these schools is that students were using complex texts. They were constructing effective arguments. And a lot of what was really interesting in some of these schools when we said, how is the Common Core, affected, the work? We go, we're already doing it. We're already doing it. It's just now we're starting to align to it. But as far as, just having, understanding the reasoning of others and being able to put an argument together and a thesis statement, students, you saw them doing that. One of the things that I highlighted in my visitations was the work of Santos and Darlene Hammond and Chuck on how, when we're teaching, no matter what language, but specifically in dual language classrooms, teachers really have to pay attention to language progressions. How do students learn language, both in terms of general language acquisition and in terms of acquisition for discipline-specific academic language? So in observing teachers, I was able to see that this was something that was very, very clear to them in the ways that they worked with. And our book will have examples of what we saw, but right now I don't have those examples with me. And then looking at language demands, what kinds of linguistic expectations are embedded within specific tests and tasks? So that's another thing, is a lot of times Santos they do a very good job in this article, and it's an Understanding Language. It's a website through Stanford. You can download this article for free. But just looking at what are the linguistic expectations when students are learning two languages, okay? And then the other one is language scaffolds, and that was a beautiful thing that we saw when we were observing. It's just that these teachers use instructional strategies, and they knew when to use the scaffolds and when not to use the scaffolds. So, I had an opportunity to observe a couple of teachers that were doing some poetry and just some very, very specific scaffolding that was very appropriate for that particular lesson. And then, of course, language supports. How are students supported through their learning? And always, using the buddy system or language brokers. And so it was really interesting to see the way that these teachers structured it. Because, again, they're a familia. They're all moving towards success. No one gets to stay behind. In these schools, everyone was held accountable for everyone's learning. And that was, you could see that loud and clear. This is just a quote that I like from one of my articles, and that's just that efficacious language education leverages the linguistic capital of immigrant youth and heritage speakers to realize their academic potential. I saw that. As a researcher, when you say, like, okay, this sounds really good, but to be able to walk into classrooms and see it, and you go like, wow, it can happen. It's not just literature. And so for me, this is one of the reasons that this study was very important for us, to be able to see what does it look like in action, how is it manifested in the classrooms. So one of the things that, from my own personal notes in reviewing these schools, in talking to principals and the instructional leaders of these high-performing dual language schools, is that they really understood the major shifts in dual language education. They understood the content and language complexities that teachers had to be supported in so that they could work well with their students. They understood their students' contextual realities, the lived realities of their students. And of course, they really valued the culture wealth going back to Yoso. And then led a common understanding and common language. This is one of the things, language is so important. When we refer to our students, and I know in having some conversations with some of the principals and some of the teachers, they say, we don't use these words. We don't talk about students this way, and we call each other out when you start using deficit language. So to me, that's really important because we do it ourselves with our colleagues at the university, and I appreciate when someone tells me, you use that word and that's kind of it's deficit. Really? So you have to check yourself. So just seeing how this was a common thread that I saw there. Teachers' knowledge base and strengths and challenges were acknowledged, and then, of course, explicit professional development. It was really interesting to see when we would ask the question, what kind of professional development do you have? In one of the schools, in fact, the award-winning school, said that they would professionally develop each other. And if there wasn't someone there within their own community, then they would ask for help, but it would not be like someone coming to lecture, but just helping them take it to the next level. And I think that, how many of you are teachers here? Lots of teachers, okay. So teachers to me is, you are the experts, you really are. And I always take exception when people say, well, can you come and talk to our teachers? Say, no, I will work with your teachers, but not to come and lecture to teachers because you are in the classroom, so you know. Families and communities, were consistently consulted in decision-making, so it wasn't just part of the come to the PTA or come and help out in the classroom, but they were provided some research, education, professional and learning opportunities. So that I was very impressed with one of the principals where she said, when students are approaching the third grade, we have very, very special seminars for the parents to let them know what happens when scores, don't look as good as they would expect in the third grade. But then they share the research and how that works. So I thought that I was very impressed with that aspect of it, that they would do that. And in talking to the families felt respected and they felt valued in these schools. So I can't think back at what right now the overarching goal is for college and career-ready citizens, just in the nation. And the goal, I don't know if you know this, but for 2025, supposedly 80% of high school graduates will enter college without need for remedial work. Currently, 30 to 40% of incoming freshmen require remedial courses, where we're at right now. And this is throughout the nation. So we have a lot of work to do. Okay. So who's got the time? I'm supposed to be, it's 3, and what time is this supposed to be over? 3. Oh my gosh, okay. Well, let me see. I know we started later. Okay. Well, this video wasn't working earlier, and I don't think it's going to work. So I think I'm going to just skip it because it's not working. So, and I am out of time. But I want to just share with you this beautiful quote that it always inspires me. It's caminante no hay camino, el camino se hace al andar. And through this process right now that we've started to look at what do effective urban dual language schools look like and what are some characteristics. Today it was just a teaser for you for the book, and I hope that maybe next year we'll be able to present all the findings and this book, because it's something that I know I've wanted, and we had the opportunity to work with INCUS to do this. And so at that point we'll have, if you want to see test scores, we'll have test scores, and we will have a lot of other things to share with you. But I just wanted to go ahead and just let everyone know that this work is happening, and we want to make sure that people will apply for this, because it's throughout the nation, so we will have more examples and we'll be able to add to that. Dr. Maldonado, would you like to share anything? Tell them.
Just to finalize that, as folks did this work throughout the nation, and there were less than 100 applicants, because we didn't have that set of a sample where a lot of our dual language colleagues do this work in strands. And so if we're doing this through equity at the core, when you're disaggregating data between 2 strands in one school community that has some decisions that comes with consequences in a community, and it could fracture, it could make some folks be competitive. So because we were coming into this work with equity, we had to be very conscientious of what that meant to not include programs with a strand for this competition. But as we're moving forward, something to consider is, if you are going to disaggregate data across your 2 school programs or 3 school programs, how could you be respectful of those colleagues and those community members without being that type of, without collapsing or breaking the school bonds that keep everyone together in this socio-emotional, socio-political work that we're doing in dual language? And finally, in addition to doing this work with schools, we also have a center, which Dr. Alfaro did not mention, that Dr. Alfaro has executive directorship of the Center for Equity by Literacy Education Research. And so we have a partnership with NCUS, but Dr. Alfaro is actually an executive director of their own center. So wanted to make sure to share that. Gracias. Thank you all for coming to learn about the session.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Or I know we're out of time. Yes. Oh, okay. I forgot to mention that. No, we decided to just go with elementary schools for this time around. And we're going to just do elementary schools next time too, because we need to get that right, and then we'll expand. It's one of those things that we really need to focus on and do it well so that the research will be reliable. Okay? Yes. you want to respond?
So teachers as intellectuals, when we're walking into these spaces, they're talking about hegemony, they're talking about patriarchy, white supremacy, they're talking about all kinds of issues that have direct implications. So definitely those teachers as intellectuals are demonstrating those types of dialogues, not only with each other, but with the family and community members as shared decision makers.
My experience, you talk about monophilosophic ideologies and English-only context, they stay away from the word racism, and I think we need to step into those.
It's time right now, you was talking about racism and not stepping away from what it is, calling the spade. And I think that we are at a time right now where we don't have to be apologetic for anything and just call things what they are. You know, these are oppressed communities. You know, they've been excluded. So this is why this is the focus, where if we can do dual language, if we can work with dual language schools that are doing this well, those are the models that we want to hold up. And yes, everybody else, we want dual language education for them, but we want to make sure that we are always very, very cognizant and strategic in highlighting those schools that are doing it. Okay? All right, I'll let you all go. Thank you so much.